Olivia Palmer had lived alone for nearly 7 years. Her home sat quietly at the edge of a small town near Seattle, surrounded by trees that turned golden each fall. The house used to be full kids, running up and down the stairs. A husband always fixing something, music, laughter, noise. But things change. The kids grew up and moved away. The husband left, and now silence filled every corner of her two-story home. She didn't mind it at first. Solitude had its own kind of peace. She could read by the window, tend to her small garden, and enjoy her coffee exactly the way she liked it. But lately, the silence had started to feel heavier. The empty rooms echoed too much. The evenings stretched on too long. And one day, she realized she didn't need all this space. She needed a little change. That's when she listed the upstairs apartment for rent. It wasn't much a bedroom, a small kitchen, and a separate entrance. She hadn't rented it in years, but it was clean and bright. She posted the ad online, not expecting much. But within days, a man named Jack Sullivan reached out. He was moving from Boston, starting fresh after a long relationship ended, and looking for something temporary. His message was polite, short, and honest. He had a job lined up in town with a local architecture firm. No pets, no loud habits. Just needed a quiet place. They met on a Monday afternoon. Olivia opened the door and saw a tall, calm man in his mid-30s with kind eyes and a soft voice. Jack didn't carry much, just 2 suitcases and a box of books. He smiled when he spoke, and something about his presence felt ... grounded. Olivia hadn't planned to decide right away. But as they walked through the apartment, she found herself saying, "If you want it, it's yours." He moved in that weekend. For the first few days, it was like he wasn't even there. Jack was gone most of the day and came back quietly at night. Olivia would hear faint sounds, his footsteps upstairs, the soft creak of the stairs, and sometimes the gentle sound of jazz music playing late into the evening. He never disturbed her, never overstepped. Still, Olivia found herself curious. Not in a romantic way, at least that's what she told herself. But there was something different about him. Something quiet but intense. He wasn't like the usual renters she'd had in the past. He was kind, respectful, and seemed to carry something heavy behind his calm demeanor. One evening, she spotted him through the window, sitting on the porch steps, sketching in a notebook. The porch light hit his face just enough to show his concentration, the way he bit the end of his pen while thinking. She didn't stare, just watched for a second, then walked away. She told herself it was just curiosity. Nothing more. The first real conversation between them happened by accident. Jack had come down to ask about the mailbox, and Olivia was baking. She offered him a slice of warm banana bread. He accepted with a surprised smile. They talked for 15 minutes in the kitchen about weather, the town, and his new job. Jack had a calm way of speaking, never rushing his words, never trying too hard. Olivia found herself relaxing. After that, it became easier. Small chats turned into short visits. Olivia would be in her garden, and Jack would stop to ask about the plants. Sometimes he'd bring her coffee from the cafe downtown. "Thought you might like this," he'd say with a quiet smile. There was nothing flirty about it. No hints, no lines. Just two people living in the same house, slowly finding comfort in each other's presence. But Olivia noticed things. She noticed that Jack always looked a little tired, even after a weekend off. That he often sat in silence, staring out the window like he was remembering something, or maybe missing something. She wanted to ask, but didn't. It wasn't her place. One morning, she walked into the kitchen and found a note on the counter. "Thanks for the banana bread. It reminded me of home." Jack, it was simple, but it made her smile more than she expected. That week they started sharing coffee once a week Sunday mornings. Usually, Olivia would make a fresh pot, and Jack would bring something from the bakery. They didn't plan it. It just happened. During those quiet mornings, they started to talk more deeply. Olivia told him about her children, now both married and busy in different states. She spoke of her past with gentleness, even the painful parts. Jack listened closely, asking just enough questions, never pressing. Jack, in turn, opened up about Boston. about the engagement that ended suddenly, about his career that had once been fast-moving, then slowed down after he burned out. "I needed a place to start over," he said simply. Olivia nodded. "I understand that more than you know." One night, as Olivia sat reading on the porch, Jack walked by and paused. "Mind if I sit?" he asked Dot. She shook her head, and they sat together, watching the stars appear. Neither of them said much that night. But when Jack stood to leave, he looked at her and said, "This place feels more like home than any place I've been in years." Olivia didn't know what to say. She just smiled. Later that night, lying in bed, she wondered what exactly was changing. She reminded herself again he was just a tenant, younger, rebuilding his life, and only here for a while. Still, something about the way he said home stayed with her, and in the quiet of her room, Olivia realized something was starting. She just didn't know what, not yet, but she would soon. Olivia didn't know exactly when her mornings started to feel different. Maybe it was the third Sunday Jack showed up with blueberry muffins and a quiet smile. He always knocked lightly, holding the paper bag like a peace offering. She'd smile, wave him in, and they'd sit in the kitchen drinking coffee while the world outside moved slowly. He never overstayed. Their talks were easy, thoughtful, sometimes about books or music, sometimes about life. He listened without interrupting, and when he spoke, he chose his words carefully, like each one mattered. One morning Jack asked, "Were you always this calm?" Olivia laughed. "No, not at all. I used to rush through everything. Marriage, motherhood, work. Life felt like one long to-do list." He looked at her, genuinely curious. "And now? Now I like slow," she said, "even if it gets a little quiet." Jack nodded, as if he understood exactly what she meant. As October passed, Olivia found herself noticing small things. The way Jack always took his shoes off at the door. The way he looked out the window when he thought no one was watching. How he sometimes paused mid-sentence, like his mind was somewhere else. He wasn't hiding anything, but he carried something. That much was clear. One night it rained. Heavy, loud, sudden. Olivia had just finished folding laundry when she heard a knock. Jack stood in the doorway, holding a mug, his hoodie damp. "Lost power upstairs," he said. "Couldn't sleep anyway." She invited him in without hesitation. They sat in the living room, the fireplace crackling softly. Jack looked around at the framed photos on the shelves, her kids when they were little, a wedding picture tucked between travel souvenirs. "You miss it?" he asked, nodding toward the family pictures. "Sometimes," Olivia said, "but I don't live in the past. Not anymore." He gave her a small smile. "That's rare." The rain fell harder, beating against the windows. They talked for over an hour. Olivia told him about how she used to teach, how she used to plan every minute of her day, and how life taught her to let go of control after the divorce. Jack shared more than usual about how he'd spent 6 years with someone who never really saw him, how he worked too much, slept too little, and finally decided to leave before he lost himself completely. "I wanted to be someone I recognized again," he said quietly. Olivia looked at him then, not as her tenant, not as a younger man, but as someone who had been through his own kind of breaking. "You don't seem lost now," she said gently. He held her gaze. "That's because of you." The words stayed with her long after he left that night. She told herself not to overthink it, that he was just being kind. But something had changed, and it wasn't just her imagination. The following week, Olivia found herself checking the mirror before answering the door. She paid more attention to her clothes, her hair. It wasn't vanity, it was awareness. She felt awake in a way she hadn't in years. Jack noticed too. One morning, he complimented her scarf. Another time, her laugh. Small things, easy to miss, but meaningful when no one else had noticed in a long time. Their connection was quiet. Not flirtation, not romance. Just something warm. Something real, but Olivia couldn't ignore the questions creeping in. What did this mean? Was she imagining things? And even if she wasn't, what would she do? She didn't dare tell anyone. Her friends would worry, maybe even judge. "He's your tenant," they'd say. "He's younger. It's not smart." But they hadn't seen the way Jack looked at her, like her words mattered. They hadn't felt the calm that came with simply sitting next to him. One evening, as the leaves turned orange and gold, Olivia invited him to dinner. Just a simple meal: roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, a bottle of red wine. They laughed more than usual that night. Jack told a story about getting lost in Rome. Olivia shared an embarrassing moment from her early teaching days. The laughter came easily. The pauses were comfortable as they cleared the table. Jack suddenly asked, "Do you ever feel like maybe you're starting over too late?" Olivia stopped, then answered honestly, "I used to, but not anymore. I think some things are meant to happen when you're finally ready for them." He looked at her quietly, as if searching her face for something, and then he said, "You make it feel possible." Her heart beat faster, but she smiled instead of speaking. That night, after he left, Olivia sat on the porch alone. She watched the wind play with the leaves. She wrapped her cardigan tighter around her and thought about everything unsaid between them. This wasn't a crush. It wasn't fantasy. It was something gentle, slow, respectful, and real. But it was also complicated. He was her tenant, he was younger, and he was healing. So was she. She didn't want to rush it, didn't want to name it too soon. But she couldn't deny what was growing. Between them, something that had nothing to do with age or rules or logic, just two people finding something they didn't know they needed. And the silence between them now, it wasn't empty, it was full of possibility. The first frost came early that November. Olivia noticed it when she stepped outside to water her plants and saw the thin layer of white covering the leaves. The air was sharp and still. Quiet mornings had always been her favorite, but now they carried something new: anticipation. Something unsaid had been sitting between her and Jack for weeks, growing silently. Jack was still living upstairs, still knocking on her door every Sunday with coffee and something from the bakery. Their conversations had deepened. They no longer talked about safe topics. They talked about pain, purpose, and the strange beauty of starting over. But what neither of them talked about was them. It was there. Olivia felt it. In the way he looked at her a little longer. In the way her chest fluttered when he was near. But she told herself not to make it into something more. He was younger. She was careful. Too careful. One evening she was in the kitchen cooking soup when Jack came down early. No coffee this time. Just him standing in the doorway. "I had a rough day," he said softly. She nodded toward the table. "Sit. I made too much soup anyway." He didn't say much at first. Just sat quietly, hands wrapped around the warm bowl, his shoulders low. After a few spoonfuls, he looked at her and asked, "Do you ever think about doing something completely unexpected?" Olivia paused, setting her spoon down. "Like what?" "Like following a feeling, even if it doesn't make sense." She didn't answer right away. She watched the steam rise from her bowl, then said, "I used to live only by logic, but lately, feelings have started to matter again." Jack met her eyes. "That's how I feel too." The moment was quiet but heavy. Something unspoken passed between them, and Olivia felt the truth of it hit her. He wasn't just a tenant anymore. And this wasn't just curiosity or comfort, it was more. After that night, everything shifted. They saw each other more often, shared small meals, went on walks, sat together in the living room, watching old movies. It was all innocent, but the feeling underneath wasn't. It was slow burning and real and confusing. One night, while they were walking near the lake, Olivia finally said what had been pressing on her heart. "I don't know what this is, or what it's supposed to be." Jack stopped walking. "I think about you all the time," he admitted, "but I don't want to make you uncomfortable. I respect you too much for that." Olivia smiled, though her heart beat fast. "It's not about discomfort. It's about risk." He nodded. "I know. You've lived more life than I have. You've lost more. And I don't want to add weight to what you're carrying." She turned toward him. "Jack, this isn't about years. It's about where we are, not how long we've been here. And the truth is, I feel something too. I'm just scared of what it could mean." That was the first time either of them truly said it out loud. Not love, not anything official. Just acknowledgement that whatever was happening between them was real. For a while, they didn't talk about it again. But it was there. In how Jack started leaving handwritten notes on the kitchen table. In how Olivia saved a spot for him at the dinner table. Even when he didn't say he was coming. One Sunday morning, he brought her a book instead of muffins. A novel she had once mentioned, long out of print. Found it in a second-hand store, he said casually. But Olivia could see the thought behind it. "You remembered," she said quietly. "Touched. I remember everything you say," he replied. That night, after he left, Olivia sat with the book in her lap, staring at the door, wondering how she had ended up here midlife. Surprised by emotion again? She thought those days were over. But Jack had reminded her that life didn't stop giving if you didn't stop receiving. Still, fear lingered. What would people say? What if it didn't last? What if she let herself feel too much and it all fell apart again? But then came the night that changed everything. It was late, and Olivia was locking up when she heard a knock. Jack stood there, soaked from the rain, holding a folded piece of paper. "I need you to read this," he said, voice low. She opened it slowly. It was a letter, short but personal. "Olivia, this is not something I planned. I came here to start over. You've given me peace, but more than that, you've reminded me what connection feels like. I'm not asking for answers. I just want you to know I care deeply. If you feel the same, even a little, I'd like to take a step forward with honesty, with care. If not, I'll still be grateful for your kindness." Olivia didn't speak. She just looked at him, heart full, eyes soft. "Say something?" Jack asked gently. She stepped closer. "I don't have the answers either. But yes, I feel it too." For the first time, there were no questions. Just truth. They didn't kiss. They didn't rush. They simply sat in the warmth of shared understanding, finally letting the silence between them become something tender. That night, Olivia didn't sleep much. Not from worry, but from something else. Hope. She hadn't felt it in a long time. And now it was back. Not loud. Not overwhelming. Just real. Just enough. Winter came gently, wrapping Olivia's town in soft snow and quiet nights. The world outside her windows looked peaceful, but inside, her heart was alive with change. Since that rainy night when Jack's letter had brought truth to their unspoken feelings. Things between them shifted in ways neither had expected. They were no longer just landlord and tenant. They were something fragile, something new. They took their time, no rush, no pressure. Each morning they shared breakfast. Each evening they talked until the house grew too quiet to ignore. They found comfort in small routines. Jack helping Olivia clear snow from the porch, Olivia bringing warm blankets upstairs. Both of them laughing at silly movies and sharing stories. But life isn't always easy, Olivia sometimes caught herself worrying about what this meant. Her children had moved away, living busy lives. Would they understand if she told them she was seeing Jack? She wasn't sure. And Jack had his own fears of past heartbreaks, of losing himself again. One snowy afternoon, as the fire crackled in the living room, Jack sat across from Olivia with a serious look. "I've been offered a permanent job in Seattle," he said quietly. "It's what I wanted when I moved here. But it means I might have to move out of the apartment." Olivia felt her heart twist. She had hoped he'd stay, but she didn't want to hold him back. "That's good news," she said, forcing a smile. "You should take it." Jack looked away, then back. "I don't want to lose what we have, but I also don't want to be the reason you're afraid to move on." The truth was clear to both of them. They were standing at a crossroads. For days, Olivia wrestled with the future. She realized that what she felt for Jack wasn't just comfort or kindness. It was love. But love wasn't simple. It was messy and uncertain. One evening, after a snowfall had covered the town in white, Olivia found Jack on the porch, staring at the stars. "Are you scared?" she asked softly. He nodded. "More than I thought I would be." She reached for his hand. Me too. But maybe fear means something important is happening. They talked late into the night, sharing dreams and fears, hopes and regrets. Neither knew what the future held, but both knew they wanted to face it together. When Jack finally accepted the job and told Olivia he'd be moving out, the house felt emptier than it had in months. But instead of sadness, Olivia felt gratitude for the chance to feel alive again, for the courage to open her heart, and for the friendship that had turned into something deeper. The day Jack moved was quiet. They packed his things with care, shared one last meal, and hugged, holding on to the moment. "Thank you," Jack said, "for everything." Olivia smiled through tears. "Thank you for reminding me I'm not alone." They promised to stay in touch. And as Jack drove away, Olivia felt a strange mix of loss and hope. Days turned into weeks. Olivia found herself walking past the empty apartment door and smiling at the memories. She still talked to Jack, but now their connection was different, less urgent, more patient. One morning, as spring crept closer, Olivia realized something important. Love wasn't about holding on tightly or fearing loss. It was about embracing moments, growing from them, and trusting life to lead the way. Her heart was open again, not because she had all the answers, but because she was brave enough to feel, and that was enough. Sophie was setting the table when Mark walked in, smiling in a way she hadn't seen in a while. "You'll never guess who called," he said, holding up his phone. "Julianne. She's moving back." Sophie looked up, surprised. "Julianne? From college?" He nodded. "She's flying in this weekend. Thought maybe we could invite a few friends over? Casual, welcome night." Sophie hesitated. She hadn't seen Julianne in nearly 10 years, and even then she had felt a little uneasy around her. She was charming, confident, always had a way of taking over a room without trying. Mark and Julianne had been close before Sophie came into the picture, but they swore it was always platonic. Sophie believed them mostly. "Sure," she said. "Let's do it." Saturday came faster than expected. Sophie cleaned the house, picked out wine, and made a charcuterie board. Mark was oddly excited. He kept checking his phone and glancing at the clock. When Julianne finally arrived, she swept into the room like a warm breeze, laughing, glowing, confident as ever. "Still the same house," she said as she hugged Sophie. "You look great." Sophie smiled, unsure how to respond. Julianne had changed, grown even more magnetic. She wore a long coat, her hair loose, and her voice soft but full of energy. She hugged Mark tightly, longer than necessary, then spun around to look at the room. The night went by quickly. A few old friends joined them, but Julianne stole most of the attention. Her stories were funnier, her voice louder, her eyes always on Mark. Sophie watched as they reminisced about their college days. Their laughter was easy, familiar. Full of shared memories, Sophie couldn't join Dot. At one point, Sophie stepped into the kitchen to grab more drinks. As she came back, she saw Julianne lean close to Mark, whispering something that made him laugh. Sophie froze for just a moment before walking in. "Need help?" Julianne asked cheerfully, reaching for a glass. "You two are still such a team." "It's nice." Sophie forced a smile. "Yeah, we are." The night ended late. Friends left in waves, but Julianne lingered. "Do you mind if I stay here tonight?" she asked casually. "My hotel plans fell through." Mark jumped in before Sophie could answer. "Of course. Stay with us." Sophie nodded slowly, masking the flicker of hesitation. They set up the guest room. Sophie tried to shake off the feeling building in her chest, a quiet unease she couldn't explain. The next morning, Sophie woke up early. She walked downstairs and found Julianne already in the kitchen, barefoot, sipping coffee. "Oh, hope you don't mind," Julianne said. "Mark told me where everything is." "No problem," Sophie replied. But it felt like a stranger was moving in. The visit stretched from one day to the next. Julianne didn't leave. She said she needed time to find a place. She offered to help around the house, brought groceries, and stayed for dinner each night. Mark didn't seem to mind. In fact, he enjoyed her company. He laughed more, talked more. Sophie noticed the shift. Every time Julianne spoke, Mark listened closely. Every time Sophie tried to share something, conversation found its way back to Julianne. One evening, Sophie came home from work and heard music playing. She followed the sound and found Julianne and Mark in the living room, dancing. Just the two of them, laughing. They froze when they saw her. "Oh, hey. We were just being silly," Mark said, stepping back quickly. Julianne smiled. "You have such a good man, Sophie." Sophie nodded, her heart sinking. Later that night, Sophie and Mark lay in bed. She turned toward him and asked softly, "Do you think she's staying too long?" He sighed. "She just needs a few more days. She doesn't really have anyone else here." Sophie wanted to believe that. But deep down, she could feel something shifting. The next day, she found Julianne and Mark in the kitchen, heads close together, laughing over something on his phone. They looked up, and for a moment Sophie felt like the outsider at dinner. The silence between Sophie and Mark grew louder. Julianne carried most of the conversation. Sophie listened, her food untouched. After dinner, Julianne offered to clean up. "You two relax," she said. Sophie walked outside, needing air. The wind was cool, but her thoughts were louder than the breeze. How had things changed so quickly? When did her home stop feeling like hers? That night, she couldn't sleep. She looked at Mark, peacefully resting beside her, and wondered if he felt anything unusual or if she was the only one sensing the distance. Julianne stayed another day. Then another. Sophie started noticing the little things. The way Julianne looked at Mark when she thought no one saw. The way Mark talked more to Julianne in one evening than he had to Sophie in a week. The way they shared jokes, glances, silences. Sophie began to pull back. She stopped asking questions, stopped trying to compete. But she watched. And what she saw told her everything she needed to know. Julianne wasn't just a guest anymore. She was part of something else. Something Sophie hadn't been invited into. Sophie noticed the change almost immediately. Julianne had gone from guest to constant presence. She woke up with them, drank coffee at their table, offered to help with errands, and even sat beside Mark during movie nights, a spot Sophie used to fill. Everything looked normal on the surface, but the atmosphere in the house had shifted. Mark didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he did and just didn't care. He smiled more. He laughed more. He listened when Julianne talked, his eyes focused and present, the way he used to look at Sophie years ago. Sophie tried to ignore it at first. She reminded herself they were just old friends, catching up after years apart. But the feeling in her chest told her otherwise. One morning, Sophie found them in the kitchen, cooking breakfast together. Julianne was wearing one of Mark's old t-shirts. Sophie stood there, frozen in the doorway, watching them flip pancakes and laugh at some inside joke. Mark turned, surprised to see her. "Hey, we made extra," he said casually. As if nothing was strange, Sophie forced a smile. "Thanks," she replied, taking a seat. But her stomach churned. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. That day, Sophie sat in her car during lunch break and stared out the windshield. She couldn't focus at work. Her mind kept replaying the scenes from home. Mark used to text her during the day. Lately, he barely checked in. She wondered if he was texting Julianne instead. That evening, she checked his phone. She didn't want to. She hated the idea of spying, but curiosity and fear got the best of her. She found nothing explicit, but what she saw still hurt. Messages full of inside jokes, heart emojis, and late night you up texts. It was emotional, intimate, and more than friendship. She didn't confront Mark. Not yet. She didn't even know what to say. Instead, she tried harder to reconnect with him. She suggested date nights, short getaways, simple walks. He always had an excuse. Tired from work, had a headache, maybe next weekend. Julianne, on the other hand, always had time for him. One night, Sophie planned a quiet dinner. She cooked Mark's favorite pasta, lit candles, and set the table for two. Just as they were about to sit down, Julianne walked in, holding takeout and laughing. "Sorry," she said cheerfully. "I didn't know you were doing something special. Want to join me in the living room later?" Sophie looked at Mark, hoping he would say something. He didn't. He just nodded and muttered, "We'll see." The dinner was silent. Sophie barely ate. Mark seemed distracted. She finally asked, "Do you even want this marriage anymore?" Mark blinked. "Of course I do." "Then why does it feel like I'm not even in it anymore?" Her voice was calm, but her hands were shaking. Mark sighed. "I'm just tired, Sophie. You're reading too much into things." But Sophie wasn't. She knew something deeper was happening. The next day, Sophie took a long walk after work. She didn't want to go home. The house didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a place she once belonged to. When she finally returned, she heard music from the living room. She peeked in quietly. Julianne and Mark were sitting close, sharing headphones, smiling at something on his phone. They didn't notice her, and that hurt more than anything. That night, Sophie lay awake while Mark slept. She stared at the ceiling, wondering how it all changed so fast. They used to be so in sync now. She felt like a shadow in her own marriage. The next morning, she decided to talk to Julianne directly. They were alone in the kitchen, and Sophie calmly said, "Can I ask you something?" Julianne nodded, stirring her tea. "What are you really doing here?" Julianne paused. "I told you. I needed a place to stay for a while." "You could have found an apartment by now," Sophie said. "You've made yourself very comfortable here." Julianne didn't get defensive. She simply said, "I didn't mean to cause problems. But if there are cracks, I didn't make them." That hit hard. Sophie didn't respond. She just walked away, knowing the conversation confirmed what she already feared. Later that day, Sophie suggested they all sit down, her, Mark, and Julianne. It felt odd, like a meeting at work. But she needed clarity. "I need to know where we stand," she told Mark, "because this situation can't go on." Julianne sat quietly. Mark looked torn. "I never meant to hurt you," he began. "Julianne and we've just been reconnecting. But nothing has happened, I swear." "But something has changed," Sophie said, "and we all feel it." Mark didn't argue. He nodded slowly. Sophie turned to Julianne. "I think it's time you found your own place." Julianne looked surprised. Maybe she hadn't expected Sophie to take control. "Okay," she said after a pause. "I understand." That evening was quiet. No music, no shared laughter, no stolen glances. Julianne packed her things the next day. She said goodbye politely and left without much emotion. Mark didn't follow her out. He just stood by the window, silent. Sophie and Mark sat at the kitchen table, both staring at the untouched coffee in front of them. "Now what?" Sophie asked. "I don't know," Mark admitted. "But maybe now we can start talking." It wasn't a promise. It wasn't closure. But it was a beginning, one that Sophie wasn't sure she wanted. But one she knew she needed to explore. Because even after the storm, some houses can be rebuilt. And some can't. It was quieter. Almost too quiet. The music had stopped, the playful energy was gone, and Sophie and Mark were left with something heavier. Silence. At first, Sophie thought maybe the absence would bring clarity. Maybe Mark would turn back toward her and remember what they had built. But it didn't happen right away. Mark kept to himself more. Sitting outside for long stretches, staring at the lake in the distance, Sophie busied herself with chores, work, and anything else that would keep her mind from circling the same question. Was he really still mine? They shared the same space, but it felt like two separate worlds. There were no arguments, no shouting, just a quiet distance that seemed to stretch wider with each passing day. Sophie missed the version of Mark who used to check in during the day, who would rest his hand on hers while watching TV, who made her feel seen. Now, she felt invisible. One Sunday morning, over coffee, Sophie finally said it. "Do you still love me, Mark?" He didn't answer right away. His fingers tapped the mug slowly. "I do," he said quietly. "But I don't know what kind of love it is anymore." That cut deeper than she expected. Sophie nodded. She'd feared that answer for weeks, but hearing it out loud made it real. "I need the truth," she said, looking directly at him. not out of anger, not to fight. Just so I can move forward. Mark took a deep breath. When Julianne came back, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not just excitement, but being wanted. Like I mattered again. Sophie's chest tightened. So I don't make you feel that way. It's not your fault, he replied quickly. We fell into routine. You're stable, kind, loyal. But with Julianne, I felt alive. It was like waking up from something. Sophie stared down at her hands. They had built a life together. A house, years of memories. She had been loyal through everything. His job loss, his father's illness, the late nights, the long silences. She had stayed. And now she wasn't enough. I never crossed the line, Mark added, almost defensively. Nothing physical. But I know emotional betrayal counts too. Sophie nodded slowly. It does. That night, Sophie sat on their bed alone. Mark had gone for a walk, and she wasn't sure if he would come back. She looked around the room, the same space where they had shared laughs, quiet tears, whispered promises. She felt a strange sense of grief, not just for what had happened, but for the version of them that no longer existed. She began packing a small overnight bag. Not because she wanted to run, but because she needed space to breathe. When Mark returned, she met him at the door. I'm going to my sister's for a few days, she said gently. I need time to think. Mark didn't protest. I understand. At her sister's house, Sophie allowed herself to cry, the kind of deep, full-hearted crying she hadn't let herself feel in weeks. Her sister Emily just held her. You didn't do anything wrong, Emily whispered. You loved? You stayed. That's not weakness. Sophie thought about that all night. She wasn't perfect, and neither was Mark. But loyalty should mean something. Commitment should matter. She had spent so long holding everything together that she forgot she deserved to be chosen, not just tolerated. After 3 days, Mark called. His voice was soft, unsure. Can we talk? Sophie agreed to meet at the little park by the lake, the one where they used to walk in their early years. She arrived first, watching the water shimmer in the afternoon sun. Mark joined her minutes later, hands in his pockets, face tired. I've been thinking, he began. About us. About everything. Sophie let him speak. I miss you, he said. Not just the routines. I miss your voice in the mornings. The way you remember things, I forget. The way you show up even when I don't deserve it. Sophie listened, unsure what to feel. But he continued. I also know something broke between us. And I let someone else in where only you should have been. He looked up, eyes searching hers. I want to fix this, if you'll let me, he said. I want to try. Sophie's heart swelled and sank at the same time. She loved him deeply, but she also knew healing couldn't be rushed. You broke my trust, Mark, she said softly. And even if nothing physical happened, you gave the best parts of you to someone else while I was still here. He nodded, ashamed. I know. I need to see actions, Sophie continued. Not promises. Real effort, counseling, honesty. No more hiding. Anything. Mark said. They agreed to try. Slowly, carefully. In the weeks that followed, Mark booked a counselor. They sat through hard conversations. Sophie listened. Mark listened harder. There were tears and there were awkward silences. But there were also moments of clarity where they remembered who they once were. Julianne never reached out again. Mark deleted her number without being asked. Sophie appreciated that. It wasn't everything, but it was a start. One night, after a long day, they sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the stars. Do you believe we'll get through this? Mark asked. Sophie leaned her head against his shoulder. I don't know, she admitted, but I believe we're trying. And for now, that's enough. They didn't rush back to how things were. They didn't pretend everything was fine. They walked through the mess slowly, honestly. Together, and in those quiet moments, Sophie realized something important. Love wasn't just about staying. It was about being chosen, even after the storm. The days that followed were slow, quiet, and full of hard work. Sophie and Mark had decided to stay in the same house, but everything between them felt fragile. It wasn't the same as starting fresh. It was more like clearing away broken pieces and deciding what could still be rebuilt. They started attending weekly marriage counseling. At first, the sessions were tense. Sophie didn't speak much. Mark looked uncomfortable. But week by week, the silence gave way to truth. They talked about the loneliness that had crept in over the years. They talked about the walls that had quietly gone up between them. And eventually, they talked about Julianne. Mark admitted he had gotten caught up in something that made him feel alive. But it wasn't real, he said in one session, eyes fixed on the floor. It felt exciting because it was easy. Sophie wasn't easy. You were real. You showed up every day, and I took that for granted. Hearing that hurt, but it also brought Sophie a kind of closure she didn't know she needed. At home, things were still awkward. Meals were quieter than they used to be. Small talk felt forced. But Sophie noticed the small efforts. Mark started texting her during the day again. He cleaned up without being asked. He made her coffee in the mornings and sometimes just sat next to her without trying to fix anything, just to be present. One evening, he brought home a small bouquet of wildflowers. I passed these and thought of you, he said. Sophie didn't say much, but she placed them in a vase and kept them by the kitchen window. It was a tiny moment, but it stayed with her. She wasn't sure she trusted him fully again. How could she so soon? But she was also aware of the love that still existed between them, quiet. Bruised but not gone. Sophie spent more time with herself, too. She joined a local painting class on Thursday nights. She hadn't picked up a paintbrush in years, but something about doing something just for her felt freeing. After class, she'd walk to the small cafe down the street and write in her journal. It became her time to process everything without pressure, without pretending. Mark noticed the change. One night, when she returned from class, he looked up from the couch and smiled. You seem lighter, he said. I think I am, she replied. And she meant it. One Saturday, Mark suggested a drive to the coast. Just the two of them. Sophie hesitated, but agreed. The drive was long and quiet at first. But then they started talking about nothing important. About music. About how much gas cost when they first met. About how they used to dream of buying a cabin by the lake. When they reached the beach, Mark took her hand gently. It had been weeks since he'd done that. Sophie led him. They walked along the shore in silence, the waves crashing nearby. The wind soft on their faces. I know I messed up, Mark said finally. I can't take it back, but I want to be better. Not just for you. For us. Sophie nodded. I want to see if we can find our way again. But it has to be real, honest. No more pretending things are fine when they're not. I understand, he said. They stood together for a while, the sun dipping low in the sky. No grand promises were made. No dramatic kiss. Just two people choosing again to try. Back home, the pace of healing was slow but steady. They set new rules for themselves. Open communication. No hiding emotions. Time apart when needed, but always with the intention of coming back together. And they held each other accountable, kindly but clearly. Months passed.